Welcome to Post Games, a podcast about how and why we love video games. I am your host, Chris Plant, and I am so happy to have you here. On paper, Xbox should be sitting comfortably atop video game mountain. In 2023, after nearly 2 years of intense legal battles at the highest levels of the government, Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard King for $68.7 billion, roughly the GDP of Iceland and Haiti combined. Microsoft gained many of the world's biggest franchises, gaming or otherwise, including Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Candy Crush, along with the studios that created and maintained them and plenty more. The deal culminated years of major video game studio acquisitions, including ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda, the creators of Fallout and Elder Scrolls. That one was for $7.5 billion, and never, ever did I think $7.5 billion would seem, by comparison, small. Now, for much of its existence, Xbox had a reputation for lacking a deep catalog of big, exclusive franchises, at least when compared to its competitors at PlayStation and Nintendo. But in 2023, with a full set of arrows added to an already crammed quiver, it appeared that that argument had been resolved with a checkbook. With all of this talent and all of these iconic games and franchises, Xbox, it seemed, would be able to fuel its Game Pass subscription service. And though it admittedly wouldn't win the console race anytime soon, if ever, the gaming giant would be positioned to win whatever comes next. Maybe the company will still do that. However, 2 years later, it is unclear what that next thing is. And in the interim, things are rough. Since May of 2024, Microsoft's gaming division has had 4 major layoff events, resulting in studio closures, game cancellations, and the laying off of an estimated 9,000 employees. That number, admittedly, is tricky because Microsoft doesn't provide elimination numbers based on individual teams during a mass layoff event. Needless to say, the impact has been felt across the group. From the creators of the console and PC hardcore driving simulator Forza to mobile game designers at Blizzard. Both outside and now inside Microsoft campus, the larger company is receiving growing protest for its tools, including AI, being used by Israel and Gaza. Current and former Microsoft employees took over a plaza at Microsoft's headquarters in protest. The BDS movement, short for Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, has targeted Xbox specifically, encouraging gamers to boycott the gaming division with tiers of engagement that range from canceling Game Pass memberships to boycotting all Xbox products outright. Now, I do really want to know what has happened at Xbox in the past few years, and I hope to have answers in time. But with so much change still happening, it feels as though we are right in the middle of a period of transition, one that feels from the outside as existential to Xbox as the birth of the console itself. So what do we do? Well, when I can't even imagine a future, my instinct is to turn to the past, which is why this week I wanted to go back to that moment when Xbox didn't exist and Microsoft's investment in games was a group of employees in the double digits. I want to understand how Xbox came to be and to revisit the key points on its timeline from a perspective that has gone largely overlooked. Today's guest is former Microsoft Xbox VP Shannon Loftis, a veteran video game producer and executive who helped to grow Xbox from an idea to a console to a subscription service and everything in between. As I said, Xbox may still have a bright future ahead of it. All of the pieces may be coming into place in some way that most of the public just can't see. But the cool thing is, we don't have to imagine a working, interesting, exciting Xbox. We can actually see what this company looks like at its best if we just rewind the clock. So, today on Post Games. Before and after Xbox. Act 1, Microsoft's earliest tiny team of game makers. Act 2, Xbox, before the acquisitions. Act 3, as always, the news of the week. And for Patreon subscribers, I have a bonus up top. It'll start before everything else, basically right after this. It's something that I felt like I needed to put together for myself, and that I hope will resonate with you in this very weird moment. I call it the case for having fun. On one hand, it's kind of self-descriptive. On the other hand, I think it's something that anybody who listens to this show needs to hear. A very timely Patreon bonus, the case for having fun. You know how this goes. This is the moment where we split up. Patreon subscribers, I have a little bit of, guidance, a PSA, some self-help about how to think about games during this absolutely atrocious period of time. I think it's important to hear, and I hope that you take it to heart. For everyone else, no worries. We have basically the entire show ahead of us right now. We have a wonderful, humongous deep dive interview with Shannon Loftis coming up. We've got the news of the week, so I'll toss you right to that. And Patreon subscribers, well, I want you to hear this. It is a new year and you want to eat better, but you still have no time to work with. You have no energy. You have so much going on in your life. What do? You do Factor. 2 minutes, real food, and you are done. You're not failing at eating healthy. You're failing at having 3 extra hours in every night. You're failing at not being a chef and wanting to do cleanup. Factor takes care of that. It has delicious food that is good for you. You got lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole food ingredients, and none of the yucky stuff, no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners. It will offer you whatever you need to match your lifestyle. For me, Mediterranean diet, it really works well. But maybe you need something else, like a high-protein diet or GLP-1 support or ready-to-eat salads. Whatever it is, Factor wants to meet you on your page. Always fresh, never frozen, and like I said, ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no cleanup, just chill. I use Factor. I think that you should too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames, 50 off, and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscriptions purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. Act 1, Microsoft's earliest tiny team of game makers. Shannon Loftis joined Microsoft in 1993 as an administrative assistant and left in 2022 as the VP of Microsoft Xbox Game Studios. The veteran game producer and executive is, in my opinion, brilliant. She's frank, and she managed to climb an industry notorious for being a boys' club in the 1990s and early 2000s, when just getting time and space to pump breast milk required an entire corporate debate. That is a real example that we will get to in this episode. In the first half of our conversation, Shannon talks about Microsoft's gaming division before Xbox, when it was a handful of people teaching millions of strangers to use Windows through the magic of solitaire, to the largely forgotten early days of 3D PC games when Steam didn't exist, modem speeds were measured in the kilobytes, and operating system updates got snuck into copies of Age of Empires. Then in the second half, we get a tour of some of Xbox's biggest swings, from the origins of Kinect to a bold plan to bring video games to Hollywood 10 years before they became the hottest thing in town. This is an exceptionally rare conversation with someone who hasn't just watched the industry be built across decades and generations, but played a key role in its design and its creation. What was your very first job at Microsoft?
Oh, my very first job at Microsoft. I had moved to Seattle and my personal circumstances changed. My relationship ended. So I took a temp gig at Microsoft to try to earn enough money to move back to the East Coast. So I was somebody's administrative assistant, and I was not a very good administrative assistant.
How? I mean, this is before Windows 95.
It is, yes. This was back in 1993.
How do you go from that into what is their early game division? What takes you through that path?
A few things. So that job, like I said, I was not a good administrative assistant, but I did have a programming and computer science and specifically database architecture background. And my boss recognized that I could help him with a project that he was working on. I don't even remember the specifics of it. It was so long ago. So he offered me a full-time job. And I took it because the pay was better. And then I started making friends. And a friend of mine, a woman named Jo Tayo, was working in the EPU, the Entertainment Product Unit. And she said, hey, there's a job open. Do you want to come interview for it? And it turned out to be database related. They wanted a card game. They wanted to make a card game for the MSN, the Microsoft Network, which became MSN, which was then an emerging technology. And so that's a database problem, card games. And that was my first job. I interviewed and got the job.
Paint me a picture of what it is like going into the office in 1993 to 1995. What does Microsoft the campus look like at that point?
Wow, that is such an amazing question. It feels a lot like college. You walk in, there are people playing disc golf. People don't dress professionally. I got teased a little bit because I came from a management consulting background, so I had suits. I didn't wear suits to work, but I did wear dresses and things like that, and I was quickly labeled as uptight. Just the energy was so creative, and it was competitive. It was highly, highly competitive. But it was a very, very social campus. You met people so easily, whether it was waiting in line in a caf or walking from building to building for meetings. It was a much smaller campus at that point. I think there were maybe only 20-ish buildings, and there was only the one campus. But I mean, it was a great place to be. And for me at that time, it was incredibly freeing because I had grown up on the East Coast and I had a super tight family, went to college, and then straight into management consulting, which is very constrained. There are so many things you cannot do and say as a management consultant, and everything is quite prescribed. And so coming to Microsoft and suddenly having so much autonomy, essentially being told, we need a card game, go figure out how this happens. It was an incredible amount of responsibility, but I loved it. I loved the freedom. And this was my first exposure to the video game development industry as well. And this was probably that was like 1995, early in 95. And there was a ton of energy around Windows 95 launching. It just felt like we were kind of the center of the world, with the amount of focus on everything the company was doing. There were a lot of super smart, socially inept people.
Sure.
I definitely fell into the socially inept side of things, but I just felt like I found my people. I wasn't offending, I wasn't stumbling into career limiting moves left and right, which I kind of did as a management consultant.
I'm so glad that you mentioned EPU earlier. One, because I didn't know if you actually pronounced it that way. But two, your other team, I think, is AS, which is
it was
not better?
AAS.
Okay, great.
No one called it AS.
Good. I'm relieved to hear that at least. Can you tell folks what Microsoft even wanted out of games at the time? Because Xbox is a twinkle in the eye at this point.
Chris, that's the $3 trillion question. I couldn't tell you now what Microsoft wants out of games. Back in those days, the original Solitaire started because we were moving to a graphical user interface and we wanted to teach people to use the mouse. And so that was why Solitaire was included in every copy of Windows. And then, to be a little bit less facetious about why Microsoft was in games, there was a pitched battle for the personal computer in the office. And it was the belief of Bill Gates and his leadership team at the time that same battle was going to happen in the home. And so games were a way to start making your Windows computer more of a consumer device. The types of games we had were not necessarily the most direct path to that. Some of them were amazing. We had acquired this company called the Bruce Artwick Organization. They make flight simulators. So the original flight simulators were both technically brilliant and massively popular. And when DirectX came along and 3D rendering became a possibility, we had a game called Hellbender, which was kind of a spaceship warfare type thing. I think it was all raycasting. Everything was either a technical experiment or just a grab for a consumer segment. And it was not considered to be a serious part of the company.
What is the consumer segment that you were responsible for? What is, to get the name correct, AAS and not AS?
It's action adventure strategy. By the time we rolled into the genre-based organization, the investment in games was a bit more organized and it was a bit more structured. And so we were just trying to address all potential gaming genres. So action adventure strategy included things like, obviously, Age of Empires, Close Combat, which was a real-time strategy, World War II, history-based game. It was actually, I loved Close Combat. I thought it was so much fun to play. Gosh, what else? The adventure included things like Voodoo Vince, and I think we made some runs at existing games trying to make imitators. Everyone loved Lara Croft and Tomb Raider, so I think we had our own imitation Tomb Raider for a while, and I don't quite remember what happened to her. The first game I ever actually managed to get out the door was a game that was inspired by Starship Troopers, and it was called Outwars. And it was a Space Marine game. You were fighting big bugs and you had a jetpack. I think we sold a total of 7,000 copies of that game. But, you know, I was proud of it. I liked it. I really enjoyed working on it, and I liked the people that I got to work with, and I could land all the jumps. So that worked well, too.
There's something strange about this era of PC gaming, and I'm curious if you can put words to it. But it's the period between Doom and Quake and Steam blasting off.
Right.
Where it feels like all of these games came out. Midtown Madness, Motocross Madness, right? These games that I distinctly remember seeing at a CompUSA.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet feel a little bit lost to history. And I'm curious if you agree with that, and two, if you have any ideas why.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And it's an interesting time because honestly, the PC was not the best. It wasn't that well suited for playing games. Windows 95 as an operating system started to pull together the notion of like hiding the inner workings of your PC from you as the consumer. But I worked on Motocross Madness. I was the publishing producer on that game, and it was one of the earliest 3D accelerator required games. And it was incredibly challenging to keep the drivers, all of the different 3D accelerator cards, all of the DirectX calls all in sync. And even, you know, it's a kind of embarrassing to talk about this today, but we launched that game with a database on the disk, and it was a physical good. There weren't really reliable means for distributing digitally, at least not from a mass-produced software perspective. So you did have to go through CompUSA and Egghead and Walmart, other stores like that. Retail was 99% of the sales. So we printed all of our disks, and it had a database. And when you loaded up the game, you put the disk into your PC, it would say, hey, I need to check all your drivers and make sure that they're okay to run this game. And then we would look at your driver and say, sorry, no, you need to go out to this website and download a new driver for your 3D accelerator, and then you can play this game. Not exactly a grab them in the first 5 seconds experience. We shipped with manuals and you needed them.
Do you remember the first time that you heard the name Direct Xbox, or Xbox for that matter?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I think I do. So by then I had moved to specialize in being a publisher for racing games. So I had worked on Motocross Madness, Midtown Madness. We had a Monster Truck Madness 2 in the works. And then all of a sudden, Ed Fries was the head of games at the time. And he came in and he said, hey, so we're switching strategies. We're now going to go after the console space. And we're working on a box, and it's called the Xbox. And we were all at that point very familiar with DirectX. And there are a lot of apocryphal stories out there about why it was called X cells, all that silly stuff. But really, it was just, I think, a math nerd way. It's, it's like a variable, like direct draw, direct play, direct audio. So it wasn't anything nefarious. My personal opinion was that Xbox was a really silly name. But I really loved the premise of it, which is, hey, if you're already writing games for Windows, for DirectX, you know how to write a game for Xbox because the calls are the same. DirectX was one way that you could draw pictures on your screen, but there were other ways to draw pictures on the screen as well. And which one your particular PC ran was really up to you as the consumer to choose one, either through your operating system or through the software that you chose to install. The APIs should have been the same. The core operating system, the paging, memory management, all of that stuff, all the same. So it was like a value pitch for developers. Hey, write one game and play it in two different places.
What did you feel when you heard, hey, we're pivoting to console? Were you excited? Were you disappointed?
I was super excited because working on racing games, the PC wasn't a big racing game platform. And first of all, my budgets were always quite severely limited. Our games were typically pretty well received, but they didn't sell as well as we wanted to. And so to me, it felt like, well, we're opening up a whole new world and we're reaching consumers in a much more direct way. And by the time Microsoft invested in Xbox, I was so heavily invested in the video game industry. I felt like this is a chance for us to be relevant. And this is where we went from not being considered a serious business at Microsoft to, oh, yeah, this is a real business. And this is something that Microsoft should be investing in. And it is worthy of Microsoft's investment. I was wildly excited. I just saw a massively bright future.
It's weird to talk about Microsoft as a startup, especially even then when it has 20 buildings. But there can be a feeling when you work at a large company, if you're not on the thing that is the center of attention, that you can be chopped off at any point. Mm-hmm. Was there a point in your career at Microsoft where you felt comfortable or safe versus stressed out that it might just end at some point?
I think you could put this down to naivete on my part, but I didn't operate from a basis of fear of the rug being pulled out from under me, not because I believed in the righteousness of what we were doing. The first few years I worked in games, I couldn't believe we were getting away with it. And I operated under the assumption that Microsoft was growing so fast. And it was at that point where 50% of Microsoft people were millionaires, of which I was not. And I just figured we were a rounding error. And as long as we didn't do any harm, nobody would bother us. And then when the Xbox became our strategic direction, at that point, it felt like the company was really making a bet on the game builders and the gaming industry. And I just stopped worrying. Later, I definitely had several doses of reality. But in the first, I'm going to say 10 years, it was actually just go grow, make mistakes, learn from them, move on, share your learnings, be transparent. It was a very aggressive culture, but it was also, there was fear, but the fear wasn't about Microsoft walking away from the whole business. The fear was about how aggressive everybody was all the time. And the culture was quite abrasive. And were you going to burn out or murder somebody or, flip out and throw a monitor?
That's what the Frisbee golf was for, Yeah.
I thought that was more like to keep us from ever going home. I was a little surprised they didn't have laundry facilities on site.
I don't even know if I'll keep this in the episode, but one of my favorite video game memories ever was I was visiting the EA offices in LA. And this is when Riccatello was the CEO.
Yeah.
And he was trying to make a real big show of how EA is a great place to work. And they came out and he grilled us hamburgers on a grill that like had never been used very clearly. And they had a soccer field in the middle of LA, which how much that soccer field cost. And you just saw two teams get escorted out to play during our meal and then escorted back to work during it. And it was, I'll never forget it.
Fun.
Yeah. And you talk about, eventually you do get to that point where the reality hits.
But it's interesting because that was tech, right? That was all of tech. Microsoft's campus was a playground. There was a beach volleyball court. There was a softball court. There were water features, beautiful places to walk. There was a set of woods behind the campus with paths winding through. So you really you could get a whole lot of your living done there. And especially when you were surrounded by a few thousand people your own age.
Yeah, the power of the campus. In the lead up to the Xbox launch, was there a low point's not the right word here, but there tends to be overwhelming moments whenever you're taking on something that seems a bit impossible. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious when that moment was for you.
So we didn't know what we were doing as a console company. And I wish I could say the launches got better. Maybe they did. But the first Xbox launch, we were working on unfinal hardware with unfinal OS, unfinal APIs, game code that was wobbly as heck. There was a moment, so my primary project that I was working on for Xbox launch, the original Xbox, was Project Gotham Racing with Bizarre Creations, people that I still adore to this day, rip Bizarre. And we had the game bones all in place, but there just literally was not time to balance it so that race 2 is harder than race 1, 3 is harder than 2. We didn't have sophisticated AI. We didn't have mass quantities of QA people. It really came down to one guy on my team, and it's a guy that you know. His name is Chris Novak, and he literally wrecked his hands, at least working on the first half of the game, balancing it. Another major contributor to that effort was Dan Greenewald, who until recently was massive in the Forza business in Turn 10. You hit a point of despair where you realize you can't cut any more features. And there's no more time, and literally cannot physically get done what you need to get done in order to meet the deadlines. And then on top of it, there was all of this sort of certification stuff, which was extremely unknown. It was not well understood. It wasn't even completely defined. And yeah, I definitely remember crying myself to sleep and then waking up an hour later and then coming in the morning and seeing people like Chris and Dan had been in either all night or since 2 a.m, and their hands were like literally messed up from holding that giant controller and trying to balance a racing game.
We're going to take a break in just a second and get into the actual Xbox era. But before we do, what was your reaction the first time they handed you the Duke, the controller the size of roughly a steering wheel?
I had heard many rumors about it, and so I wasn't surprised, but I couldn't reach the buttons. I don't have huge hands, and I could not wrap my hands around that thing. It was ridiculous. I felt frustrated. I don't know who they got to design this, but it must have been a very large person.
Yeah, 7 feet tall with the lumberjack hands.
People forget how heavy that was, and that is super hard on your wrists. I think it was just inexperience in building handheld devices. Although we had a pretty robust handheld input devices business, and we had that business for many years and built some really great controllers. So how we landed with that, it was codenamed Duke. The Duke controller is just absolutely beyond me.
It's a perfect name for a miserable controller.
I went to Duke, young man. We may not insult that name.
Oh, no, sorry. I was thinking Duke Nukem. Duke, a school. I would never tarnish the name of a great college basketball university.
I think it was actually named after the son of one of the project leads, who's a really super nice guy. Hi, Duke.
I love that I'm turning 40 finally in 3 weeks. And I can still be a young man. That was the first time I've been called that in a long time. And I'm not going to lie, it felt very flattering.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Let's take a quick break. And then we'll come back and talk about Xbox. Okay, so we're now in the Xbox era. It's all happening. Microsoft has committed to it. What do you remember of the launch?
Oh, wow. I remember a few things. First of all, just absolute nail biting. It was maybe the worst feeling I had ever had. At that point, I had released a few games, but the fact that it was a system and it was a piece of hardware and it was the operating system and the peripherals and the games all launching all at once, and was everything going to work? And so all the pressure of how are people going to react to the game that you're making, which is in itself a little bit of a sickening feeling. And as well as, is everything going to come together so that they have the experience we think that they're going to have? It's just terrifying. Also, I was extremely aware of the fact that because we had worked with Bizarre Creations, they had been a favorite developer of Sony before. So they made a big investment and took a big risk switching to working with us on an exclusive game. So I felt like that whole studio was kind of counting on us, Microsoft, to deliver an Xbox that was actually functional. And I felt good about the people that I knew were working on all of the various parts, but it just wasn't clear to me from my game producer seat who was making sure everything came together and how it was all going to come together. That launch was terrifying. So much so that when it happened, honestly, if there were big technical glitches, I do not remember them for the original Xbox. There were, however, many parties, many. And
Yeah?
yeah.
Wait,
yeah.
what is a party like at that time? What does party mean? As best as you can tell it.
It was not your standard corporate, pizza and champagne in the conference room. I don't even know how to explain it. It was wild. There were a lot of drinks. There were some things that would raise a lot of eyebrows today, and actually, in fact, raised eyebrows back then in terms of how the drinks were delivered and sometimes the way people behaved at these parties. To be honest, I kind of dipped in and out because it had just been such an exhausting trip. The last thing I wanted to do was spend more time and I happened to I gave birth in November of the year that Xbox was launched. So I was very pregnant during launch. So it wasn't my scene, but I certainly heard plenty of stories at that time. And I know that HR was strengthened as a result. Policies were adopted.
Related into the what it feels like to be at a video game party, I guess maybe on the side of that, you are suddenly a producer at what is now a major player in the video game space. You are also a woman working in video games, which I could say any point in history, but specifically this point in history is very unique. Was that something that you were distinctly aware of when you're taking meetings, when you're working with people? There are a lot of men, obviously, when you watch an Xbox documentary, not as many women.
Yeah, there was no way to not be aware of it. In some ways, it was great fun. I have never minded being odd. And so being a lot of the time the only woman in the room gave me the ability to kind of use the attention. And sometimes I used it properly. And when I did, it was I felt very powerful. I was also incredibly lucky to land in a tiny pocket of the games industry at that time with a huge number of very powerful, very smart women. I'm going to say all of whom are still dear friends of mine. Bonnie Ross was in the group at that time. Kiki Wolfkill, a woman named Christina Chen, who was a producer, then went to Google. We quickly came together as a little bit of a coalition, and we were able to backstop each other. They became a bit of a board of directors for me. Hey, I'm thinking about taking this other job. What do you think? I have to go to this big meeting. What should I wear? And in particular, Bonnie was somebody that made me feel very comfortable just being who I was in the room with the men. Another massive influence at that time was Melinda French Gates. She had been at Microsoft, and she was a huge advocate for women, even back in the 90s, in the early 90s. And she gave a talk in which she gave a few pieces of advice that I just took to heart, and I kept them there. And one of them was, don't try to be one of the guys. If that's not who you are, don't pretend like you're not a woman. It's important for the people around you to understand what makes your experience different from theirs. And so as much as you can share that then do. When I came back from maternity leave, and there was a big internal debate at Microsoft about breastfeeding. Are they going to make it possible for breastfeeding moms to get milk at work and that sort of thing? And it was a huge amount of Melinda's influence and Bonnie's influence that made me comfortable to go to my boss and say, you're not handling this well. You're making it difficult for me, which makes me less effective at work. And so I need you to provide me a space, and it has to be private. And these are the specifications. And so Microsoft came through. Later on, I was part of a group of people that got to talk to Robbie Bach, who was running Xbox at the time, about just the whole shock and pain and horror of coming back from maternity leave, the culture shift from being at home with an infant to coming back into the office and being expected to not just hit the ground running, but know immediately and intimately everything that had happened during the months that you were out and all of the context for everything. And by the way, why aren't you caught up? And gosh, you were gone for so long. Did you have to be gone for that long? And he was incredibly empathetic, and he listened, and policies changed.
I'm so glad you brought up the post-maternity leave thing, because there's a thing that I even went through when I took paternity leave. In my previous employer, we had a pretty decent paternity leave and great maternity leave. And there's a thing that can happen in startups or really high stress work environments where it is a campus. It's college campus. And you have a kid and you don't want to go back to college after that.
That's right.
And for men, and I felt this, it's like a welcome back to college. You're back, just get right back to it.
Right.
And there's a different expectation for women where Microsoft is at and where this aligns with you having a child. I can't imagine that culture shock of going back and being like, I'm going to be an adult now, and I need this company to be an adult too.
Yes. Not too long after I came back from my leave, Microsoft hired a new VP for HR, a woman named Lisa Brummel. And Lisa, it was not explicitly her charter, but she brought a different sensibility, more empathy to the role of HR leadership than the previous leaders had. And it was at that point that I felt that Microsoft was trying to grow out of its college era and grow more into being a mature company. It was right around then we started crossing the line into like more than $1 billion a quarter. And so the whole company had to grow up, because that kind of chaotic college energy is great for a startup, but it is not great for a mature, sustaining business.
Yeah, they thought about serving pizza at the parties instead.
No, that came much later.
Yeah. So you end up becoming this mentor figure. You become the boss. You end up running some very major projects. 2 of them have complicated histories and have very, very warm places in my heart. I want to talk about Connect and Project Natal first. What are your earliest memories of this project?
Oh, gosh, so crystal clear. So I had been living overseas. I was living in England, and because Microsoft had acquired Rare and Lionhead, and so I was part of a team that went over to figure out what integration looked like, make sure that Fable 2 was shipped on time and to quality, to work with Rare, because we had just got to the point where the Stamper brothers had earned out and they had stepped away from the company. So what does Rare look like moving forward? Rare had a really great, solid, forward-moving direction and really good leadership. And then 2009 hit, and the global economy collapsed. And it seemed like a good time not to be on a super expensive expat package over in England. So I remember Phil Spencer, who I'd worked very closely with for many years, had gone back over to run all of the games group. And he said, listen, there's this guy that I hired, Kudo Sonoda, and he's working on a project that I think you're going to find interesting. And so I flew over and I had a meeting with Kudo. And I don't know if you remember working with Kudo at all, but
I very much remember working with Kudo. Can you actually just very quickly give people a brief summary of who this person is?
Kudo is a creative force of nature. He is an incredibly persuasive and charismatic person with a big vision, big ambitions, really good at getting people to perform beyond their wildest expectations. He can be a lot, but he is like just a fundamentally at his heart, a deeply solid human being with human values that I adore him to this day.
And a bit of a futurist.
Yes,
is how I would maybe describe
absolutely.
him.
I love that. He is a futurist, and he's also a big thinker. Kinect was partly created for demographic reasons, right? Xbox had become the shooter box, and there's a certain kind of demographic, very loyal, very awesome demographic, but maybe not big enough to sustain growth. And so Kudo was tasked with figuring out how to get other people to play the Xbox. And it wasn't taking the Xbox controller and painting it pink. It was really going and doing like fundamental lifestyle research on what people wanted from their entertainment. And the result was the Kinect.
What was your role in getting it out into the world?
So I moved back from England, and with Kudo, I built a studio called Good Science. And Good Science was the laboratory for Kinect. That's one of the reasons why it was called Good Science. At the time, it was called Project Natal, and it was an experimental device. And so we created a couple of apps to show its potential. And we were lucky enough to be given a lot of leeway to explore many different approaches. So we tried the literal like gesture button translation. So we tried pew pew shooting games and stuff like that, and quickly realized that it was just never going to be the same level of fun from an accessibility or gameplay visceral standpoint as the traditional shooter input devices. So then we started exploring whole body mechanics. We had emptied out conference rooms and set up this crazy device. And we had to like hang sheets in some conference rooms because it was an IR device, and there was like IR scattering paint on the walls. And it was all very like just DIY, figure it out, make it work. Don't ask permission, do what you need to do and ask for forgiveness later. And we had to do that many times. And all but with tons and tons of support from Kudo. And Kudo was able to get support from everybody else in executive leadership as well. So we first got the device greenlit, the game with the crazy red rubber balls. That was one of the adventures in Kinect Adventures. Then we put that game and another one on stage at E3 to announce Project Natal. That was a super head rush moment. It was really fun to see people respond. Even the duct tape nature of the demos that we put on stage was crazy, and everything didn't work until the last second when it did. And then we pulled it off, and that was just kind of a miracle for all of us. And then we created the pack-in game called Kinect Adventures, which was intended to show people how to use Kinect and what to expect from Kinect games. And that also became the core of the Kinect development kit. So developers all over the world that were building Kinect games were using code that had been created by our engineers. And then we went on to do a few more Kinect games. We kind of split up into several different studios. One worked on Kinect Star Wars. One worked on Kinect Fun Labs. That was probably the most creatively energetic, like 3 years of my career. It was always trying to think outside of the box. Kudo was a big believer in doing differentiated research, he called it. And so that involved everything from talking to people in their homes to getting intact families into the office to play Kinect games to help us test. We had something like 1,500 intact families come in and play before we launched, to walking around with a notebook at all times and just jotting down, sharing notebooks on a regular basis, things that occurred to us. I remember at one point I was watching Dexter and I thought, what if Dexter was watching me? Like, it sounds really creepy, but it was the basis for a super fun and immersive exploration of interactive television.
We will get to more of that in just a second. But before we leave Kinect Land, I'm sure some people who listen to this and only vaguely remember the Kinect era, but I think it's hard to know what it was like when you experienced this for the first time. Because I was at that Project Natal announcement, and I remember doing the behind-the-scenes demo of it and playing Burnout Paradise, where you could use your foot as a pedal.
That's right.
And it was messy, because you're right, it was held together by duct tape. But at the same time, it felt like you were in Star Trek. Like it really did at that moment. And I'm glad to hear you talk about it and hear how rewarding and creative it felt, because the other piece of it is that technology is everywhere now.
Yeah, it is.
Like it fulfilled its purpose, even if it is now largely invisible to us.
I love that. And I can't say personally that it was an explicit goal of mine, but it quickly became clear to me that this was as much about human computer interaction as it was about anything else. And I remember total bucket list item. I got to go on Science Friday with Ira Flato, and Alex Kipman and I were on interviewing, and the Connect had just launched like maybe a week before. And there had been a few cease and desist letters because people had noticed that we were not encrypting the data that the Connect captured. And Ira said, so what's the story? Like, there have been a couple of cease and desists, but also some people are doing some great things. And Alex just very definitively stepped up and said, hey, we deliberately left that data unencrypted. That data is yours to use as you see fit. And that kind of launched this whole Connect invention creativity, people taking that device and that data and doing more wilder, more awesome things than anyone could ever dream of. And it's funny when you're out and about, you still occasionally run across one of these Connect installations where somebody made like, oh, the lights change colors as I walk through the room, or here's my body on the screen and I can do things in an airport at a little like fun center or something like that. And then there were more serious applications that were like physical therapy and stroke rehab and things like that. Being part of that, even a tiny part, which I was a pretty tiny part, it was a supercharger for me.
You mentioned interacting with the entertainment. We have to get into this because speaking of things that feel very ahead of their time, the first time I believe that we met was actually at the press rollout for Microsoft Entertainment Studios.
Oh, gosh.
And this was a relatively short piece of your career, but a very interesting one. Can you tell folks what Microsoft Entertainment Studios was?
Yes. Have you ever been in a relationship with a really good-looking person and they're just not good for you? And you're like, okay, I'm breaking it off right now, but wow, look at that person across the room. They're just so good-looking. That's Microsoft and television. We wanted to increase our opportunity to reach more people. And the thinking was to create more and more immersion with less and less barriers to immersion. And that was the vision, that was the goal behind interactive television. Just give people the chance to be in an interactive flow state, not passive, but actively participating and engaging in their entertainment, but without all the barriers that some video gaming brings. And so Microsoft hired a brilliant woman, Nancy Tellem. She was old guard CBS. She was a ball breaker. She was a tough person, incredibly knowledgeable, very warm, but from a distinctly non-technical background. So she, this is a woman who had 2 assistants to answer the emails that she received 6 months before. So a lot of my work in that group was trying to build a bridge between old TV and technology. And in the end, the thing that really tanked it was not technology. It wasn't Hollywood. It was just that the math didn't math. Like Microsoft, sure, we are more than willing to go pay Mark Burnett $100,000 an episode to make a TV show for us, which is, I think, his going rate at that point. But that's not why people like Mark Burnett do those shows. They do them for the residuals, for the ads, and the continued income from further windows. And we had just sold our advertising business to AOL. So we had no ad capacity. We didn't have the ability to make money that way that Hollywood creators make money. And at the same time, we were frustrated with the pace of development. We could get a game out in roughly 2 years, but television shows take much longer. At the time, they were taking much longer to create. And it was just a mismatch. And in the end, it was all sponsored by Don Matrick. He was very interested in bridging the gap between interactive and linear entertainment. And when he left the company, the steam totally went out of the sales of that business and it was wound down.
That is such a great point you make about the speed of development of something getting made, because I think there's an easy overnight success viewpoint with a film or a TV show of, well, it takes about 3 months to shoot it, and then you edit it, and it's out within a year. And what you miss is, yeah, you can have an Alien sequel in development for 20 years.
Yeah.
Things can just live in development. So yeah, it took maybe 1.5 years to make the Halo TV show first season. It took a little bit longer than that to actually get it to the first shoot day.
Nobody knows how long that took.
Yeah. What was it like taking meetings with Hollywood people as Xbox? Because now I just did an episode about, everybody wants to talk to video game people in Hollywood. I imagine the reception in the room was a little bit different over 10 years ago.
It's interesting because it wasn't our first time trying to be in Hollywood. And so we were met with a lot of distrust, and people came in very guarded when they spoke with us. It was incredibly helpful to have Nancy because obviously she was an insider, and she brought in a couple of other people that were equally kind of well-known inside Hollywood. In particular, there was a woman named Lydia Antonini who was great at developing totally relevant IP. So she was super familiar with comic books and upcoming novels and things like that. She just brought lots of great ideas. And she was a person that I think a lot of our partners were happy to see walking in. But for me, I honestly felt super awkward, like I was the checkbook. And I wasn't, but that was, I think, how I was perceived, if I was perceived at all. I did have a couple of shockingly great experiences, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about this. It never came to fruition, but I did put together a group of people, and we went to London and pitched Simon Cowell on an interactive television show. And meeting with Simon and his people was just, it was so great. They were so lovely, warm. Simon was charming. He was thrilled by what he saw. We had great creative energy between the two teams. As I said, it didn't come to fruition, but even just the opportunity to do that pitch was awesome.
Every once in a while, I hear a news story of a project that almost came to be like a Conqueror's Bad Fur Day animated series. And I'm like, we were deprived of a better world. Did you see any signs while you're in this space that one day Hollywood will eventually be fixated on video games, or was that just way too far away?
Oh, no, it was actually clear at the time. People were very interested in the IP for sure. And that was one of the things that I got to do, was connect IP owners through first-party studios with Hollywood developers. And it was even clear at the time that this ad-based revenue model was falling apart and that it would all move to various streaming funding structures. But we were just a little too early for that. So we couldn't quite keep up. We had streaming clients on the Xbox at the time, but we didn't have a native streaming client. And so we weren't able to participate in those subscription revenues.
You've worn so many different hats in this industry. Was there one that was a favorite, or one that was giving you the most headaches?
I mean, most headaches, absolutely, the interactive entertainment studios. I was the second hire into that group, and just trying to stretch across all of the little TV interests. Even just in Xbox, there were half a dozen people working on some sort of TV. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of creative vision for what we needed to deliver. Nancy and I brainstormed entire networks, but that wasn't what was wanted. And we brainstormed entire interactive toolkits, and that wasn't what was wanted. So, it was kind of a non-starter from so many perspectives. I don't regret it at all. It was super fun to meet cool people, and super fun to meet people that seemed cool and weren't. Probably the worst part of that whole thing was that halfway through my tenure at Xbox Interactive Entertainment, I sprained both of my ankles really badly in a parkour class. So I had to commute to LA with 2 casts and crutches. And that sucked. Favorite hat, boy, it is so hard. It's like Sophie's choice. My favorite console game was Fable 2. I just loved everything about that. I loved the team, the Lionhead team. I love Albion. That fantasy RPG is my genre, and I've always loved the Fables kind of stained glass art style and just the beauty, right? There's all kinds of funny, sad, serious, ugly, exciting things happening in the world, but the focus on the beauty of the world just made all of it a pleasure. And working with Peter Molyneux was definite experience, positive in many ways, and sometimes very frustrating, but I think that happens with anybody that's super smart. Honestly, my last role was running World's Edge, which is a studio dedicated to resurrecting the Age of Empires series from a Microsoft perspective and making it relevant both technologically And, from an investment perspective to today's market, I loved it. I've always loved Age of Empires. I never stopped playing. Getting to work on it was kind of the perfect bookend to a career. I was pretty sure when I took on that role that it would be my last job at Microsoft, because maybe 30 years is enough. And loved the fan base, the people that kept Age alive and vital while Microsoft was off doing non-Age things. We had a little super tight team. I had total autonomy from Matt Booty, who was running the Xbox Games team, to do it the way that I wanted. So I kept the team, World's Edge, very small. And we worked with as many partners as we could. And we even messed around with, like, internally to Microsoft, you don't get a lot of exposure to cash flow, but we decided to run a cash flow positive business on the legacy side, which has been really good for the team in the long run. And it was just everything we did. We focused on culture and we focused on authenticity whenever we represented history or other cultures that we weren't part of in the games. We tried to make sure we could get buy-off from actual participants in that culture. It was just, it was like kind of a dovetail of all the things I had learned in my entire career at Microsoft, and the opportunity to exercise all of that muscle and really build a nest and have a bunch of, like, birds fly out of it. That's a terrible metaphor.
Yeah. Yes. I know what you mean.
So, and they're like, I watch that studio now and I'm just blown away by what they do on a daily basis. They are so strong.
That rules. What is the biggest difference between the video game industry in 2025 versus when you started in 93 to 95?
Growth. It is not a growth industry right now. And there's so much global uncertainty, both economically and every other way. This should have been a time of growth, but our president has upset many apple carts. And it's like seeing incredibly talented people get bounced out of solid companies has been hard. Microsoft's layoff in July was unbelievably brutal to watch. But what I am seeing is a ton of promising startups. And that's how I'm filling my time these days, is I consult to startups. I'm on a couple of advisory boards, and I'm playing a whole lot of early stage software again, which is so fun. I love it. But in order for this industry to survive, we've got to get back to like a 3 to 5% growth per annum. And we've got to figure out where that growth is going to come from, because console, I believe, is mostly topped out. Mobile has caved in on itself because of the complexity and expense of building and distributing mobile games. PC is growing, which is great, but there's a lot of emerging markets that contain a ton of untapped talent that I think are going to bring new visions and new stories. And it's almost like video games were like Microsoft, crazy, unpredictable, wild, off the cuff all the time. Then a maturity phase happened over the, I would say, like 15 years between 2000 and 2015. And then there were 2 or 3 cycles of reacting to black swan events like the emergence of Fortnite and COVID. And now we should be studying the banking industry for how to remain steady and how to create growth and still have tons of value for our customers and do what we're here to do, which is to provide people with fresh opportunities for entertainment, storytelling, self-expression, and community.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was really fun, Chris. Thank you.
Is there any place people should go find you if people want to work with you on something? What's next?
So I've thought really hard about starting a new studio or taking a job. Definitely don't want a job, especially not in big tech. I am lucky enough to have reached a place where the income isn't necessary. So I love working with small studios. I love working with individuals who are trying to make a leap from one level of leadership to the next. I'm on LinkedIn.
Act 3, the news of the week. Let us party like it's 1993. That is right. After years of general disinterest, politicians are once again claiming that video games and gaming culture directly cause violence. Here's known unreliable source RFK Jr. on the matter.
There could be connections with video games, with social media. There are a number of things, and we are looking at that at NIH. So we are doing a studies now. We're initiating studies to look at the correlation and the potential connection between over-medicating our kids and this violence, and these other possible co-founders as well.
Who cares that an abundance of research proves otherwise, or that the few studies that have drawn a connection between games and violence have been broadly debunked? I regret to inform you, this is just the beginning. Meanwhile, the CEOs of nearly every major platform tied to gaming, from Discord and Reddit to Steam and Twitch, have been called by the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee to testify before Congress about the, quote, radicalization of online forum users. James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky and the chairman of the committee, said in a statement, quote, Congress has a duty to oversee the online platforms that radicals have used to advance political violence. Odd, then, that Elon Musk, owner of X, hasn't been called to testify on the matter. To be clear, there are many conversations to be had about video games and violence. I hope to have some on this show, beginning with the cozy relationship between gun manufacturers and the AAA games that license their brand names and weapon designs. In online platform moderation and the ways that forums can be used to radicalize individuals is a legitimate problem, and has been for decades. That's what's so frustrating following countless shootings by 4chan losers and the hundreds of Facebook-using boomers that tried to overthrow an election on January 6, 2021. So that's the national level. Zooming down to the state level, Florida Attorney General James Bareham has filed 2 lawsuits targeting not just companies that make and distribute porn games like Nataku, but also companies that process payments for porn games. The Attorney General's move builds on Florida's controversial age verification laws that now exist in some form in over 20 U.S. states, and that some Republican members of Congress hope to spread across the entire country. The threat to porn game makers isn't just the lawsuit, to be clear. Even if they survive the suit, the AG's pressure on notoriously skittish and conflict-averse payment providers might cause them to de-platform the distributors to stay within the good graces of the government. The effort to censor video games is getting hotter and hotter, so I'll be making a new episode on the topic next week. We'll have more on that in just a moment. But a last bit of news, because I always prefer to end on something fun. Deep Rock Galactic Survivors hit 1.0. Really, Chris? The news is that a Vampire Survivors clone exited early access after all of that stuff. Well, you're damn right it is. Deep Rock Galactic Survivors isn't just a clone of the indie game that launched 1,000 knockoffs. It builds on the core ideas, creating a top-down action roguelike that stirs in some bullet hell goodness, like the gooey strawberries at the bottom of the yogurt container. Or, I guess in human terms, you kill bugs and you break rocks and you get real big and strong and the game is good. If you need a quick pick-me-up in this weird moment, it has my full-hearted endorsement. And that is the news of the week. Listener, you now know enough Microsoft history that you are basically a human Clippy. I'm sorry. Anyway, next week, the rapid crackdown on not safe for work games. That's right, we're getting back to the porn stuff. Early this summer, I spoke with lewd game creator Hot Pink about the growing popularity and, crucially, the availability of sexy, sometimes pornographic video games. And we talked about the precarious nature of a business with unclear rules about what can and can't be published. That conversation, it turned out, was prescient. In August, payment processing companies pressured Steam and itch.io to remove or delist adult games. Since then, a war has begun between groups like the Australian-based Collective Shout that seek the removal of games they claim endorse rape and sexual assault, and a coalition of artists, free speech advocates, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and sex workers who see the effort as part of a broader conservative censorship movement that threatens to spread wider and wider. It's a complicated and far-reaching topic, so for this episode, I'll have two guests. Jean Ketterling, an assistant professor at the Political Studies Department of the University of Saskatchewan, where she teaches and researches women and gender studies with a focus on sex and porn video games. And Annie, the host of Sex Positive Gaming on YouTube, where she creates content about sexy games within the confines of YouTube's own strict censorship policies. In short, horny games are under attack, and if you want to save them, or if you care about them, or if you're just curious, you'll want to tune in. But for now, I begin my farewell. Reminder time! Post-game supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern, or earlier. They get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, they got something very special and delightful. And each month, they get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101. I am currently working on an episode about reviews, maybe the most controversial topic in video games. I can't wait to share it with you. Plus, no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Bareham. I don't know if you noticed all these new updated logos with each episode. James is killing it. If you're looking for a designer for anything, I'm just going to say you should check him out. Theme by Mark Sparling, and a special thank you to this week's guest, Shannon Loftis. Like the show? Leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or, and this is huge, share the show with a friend. Thank you so much for listening. I can't wait to see you next week.